Hello, today we are reading a book called Pig by Matilde Pratesi. This is about an extremely intense toxic friendship between two roommates. It follows the narrator, whose every decision is ruled by her controlling roommate's wishes. She wakes up every morning, and downstairs on the kitchen counter is a sticky note telling her what to wear and what to eat for lunch that day. And she obeys because she has a litany of her own issues. If you live in Canada like I do, this book is next to impossible to find anywhere. I don't know why. I think maybe it was only released in the UK, very limited or something like that, but Brie from my book club found it and read it and then sent it to me, and when I'm finished, I'm going to send it off. We're doing Sisterhood of the Traveling Pig by Matilde Pratesi, so everyone say thank you to Brie for this video. At this point, I've read up to part 1, which is about a third of the way through, and I am here to tell you about it. It begins with throwing us right into some action. Our narrator, Valentina, is late to leave her job at a little bookstore in London, and she is absolutely buzzing with panic because she knows that her roommate Clara, which I'm going to be calling her Clara and Clara probably interchangeably, but hopefully not. I don't know which one it's supposed to be. Right now it's Clara. Clara will be angry at her for being late. Valentina is slamming the till shut. She's running across the room, grabbing her stuff, checking the clock constantly, hoping that time has somehow slowed down. She's locking up with shaking hands and then sprinting home. Valentina knows that it cannot take her less than 15 minutes to arrive home from work, and she needs to be home by 6:30. This is a well-practiced, very familiar, clearly long-established, and strict routine that she feels she cannot stray from. We don't even need to know why Clara needs her home by 6:30, and we don't even wonder about the why, because we are so caught up in Valentina's fear. All that matters is that she is scared. While the anxiety she feels rushing home is immense and almost all-consuming, she also finds some comfort in heading back to Clara, because Clara gives her life clear parameters, which is something she desperately needs someone to do for her. She says that these parameters make her better, which she wants to be for her, but mostly for Clara. You can see the abusive dynamic from a mile away. Before we even meet Clara, Valentina is constantly trying to justify her to the audience and to herself. There is some level of recognition on Valentina's part that this treatment is not okay, that she is a victim and Clara is a perpetrator. She understands it deep down, but she would fall apart if she did anything other than deny it. So she focuses in on how much Clara helps her, how Clara has saved her, rather than addressing the dynamic that has struck fear into her heart for being 7 minutes late getting home from work. When she gets home, Valentina bolts straight to the bathroom and starts running a bath, trying to get the temperature just right. As she waits for the tub to fill, she is alphabetically listing pig breeds in her head to calm herself down. Because if there's one other thing that we know about Valentina besides her fear and admiration of her roommate, it's that she fucking loves pigs. Whenever Valentina can get a word in her own head around constantly wondering how Clara is doing and if she's done anything wrong that might have worsened Clara's volatile moods, she's thinking about pigs. They are also a tool to calm her down in high-stress situations. She doesn't get very far into the list before Clara comes into the bathroom, insulted by Valentina coming home late and acting very stony, while also waving her hand and dismissing Valentina's apologies as she tries to find a balance where she grovels and self-flagellates without being pathetic, because Clara hates it when she's pathetic. Clara gets into the bath, she makes a big show of shivering, which puts a pit in Valentina's stomach, and then Valentina bathes her. She soaps her up, and she bathes her. This is the kind of weird, unsettling, deeply uncomfortable shit that is exactly what I want. I was on the edge of my seat when Valentina started running that bath. Oh my god. Why are you bathing your cruel, controlling, able-bodied roommate? It's like such a totally new and contradictory almost layer to their relationship. It is vulnerable to be bathed. It's in some way giving up control to someone else, allowing them to perform an action that is considered very private and for most people preferably independent. But here, Clara is using it as like another display of her power over Valentina. Like, look, I should be the vulnerable one here, the one who needs something, but I'm not. I am in complete control. You need me. Bathing me is an honor and a requirement for your well-being. During the bath, Clara is super hot and cold. She starts off by just staring at Valentina while her body is being soaked up by her. She's totally impenetrable. With this bathing thing, again, it's made very clear how routine this is, with a lot of showing and not telling at this point, which is great and really pulled me into their story in the first chapter. I felt very immersed after it just like yanked me into their well-established dynamic. Like their world already existed and all I had to do was step in. And then I didn't even need to make the choice to step in because it starts with Valentina feeling like she's reaching out and pulling me into her panic and anxiety. Anyway, during this bath at one point, Clara just starts randomly giggling. All of a sudden, she's in a completely different mood and she says whatever Valentina is doing is tickling. And Valentina, relieved to see her smiling, leans into it and starts tickling her more. And they laugh and they joke for a minute. And then like that, the switch flips and she's back to snapping at Valentina and pushing her off, and she's pissed and she leaves the bathroom. Valentina is left kicking herself, floundering, trying to figure out what she's done wrong. There is no other possibility in her mind than being personally and singularly at fault. She must have done something. She just never knows what. Part of Valentina's willingness to believe herself as always in the wrong with Clara is that she struggles immensely socially. As much as I am not really into diagnosing fictional characters, it's undeniable that Valentina has a lot of autistic traits. And I am always so wishy-washy with my opinion on this. I feel like it changes from book to book and how it's done. Sometimes I think like, okay, you've written a book with a character that is obviously meant to be autistic or have OCD or be bipolar or whatever it is, and you haven't committed to using that label because you don't want to commit to writing an accurate and inoffensive portrayal of whatever it is you're talking about. Sometimes that choice feels like it's a cop-out for an author who ends up writing some really bad representation and can hide behind the fact that it was never explicit representation, and it just kind of makes me groan. But I actually think more often than not, I prefer it when labels aren't used, like how they aren't in this book. It's like the most basic writing advice ever, right? Show, don't tell. If this was marketed as a book about an autistic woman, I think there's almost an onus to make the autistic representation as whole and rounded as possible so that it fits into a really broad, universal mold of what a wide and reaching audience thinks autism looks like. And I think that's how you get the type of fiction that deals with autism or mental health in characters and feels like it's just ripped from the WebMD page with no thought put into like the actual human experience part of the human experience. It ends up so flat and limp and pandering. I think this book, especially in the beginning, does a good job of giving me how Valentina feels and experiences the world without putting a label that comes with preconceived notions on it, but I can also understand other people who might be rubbed the wrong way by that. I just think when you're reading fiction, it's always nicer to be able to come to your own conclusions and to interpret things from the writing rather than relying on a description. And then kind of inherently, the author needs to put less work in to build out that aspect of the character. That whole rant aside, I do have some issues with the depiction of Valentina's very atypical inner world, but we will get to that later on because they haven't appeared at this point in the book. So in chapter 2, Valentina enters the kitchen in the morning to a note on the counter telling her exactly the items of clothing that she should wear and what she should buy for lunch that day. And she's relieved that it specifies the vegetarian option because sometimes she has to make the choice of sandwich herself, and choices confuse and overwhelm her. The two of them had started doing this around the time that Valentina first moved in, when she asked Clara for help picking what to wear on an outing to the park that they were going to go on, and Clara sat on her bed and spoke in this like kind of strange, low, monotonous tone and told her exactly what outfit to try on one by one until they'd gone through her entire closet. And they didn't even end up making it to the park that day. Valentina thinks that her life is easier this way. That day, she goes to work and her boss lets her and her coworker Ollie off early because there's some event going on that evening. And Ollie invites Valentina to go for a pint at a pub nearby with him and his boyfriend. Here at the pub, there's like a little bit of the sense that they're mocking her in a way, not in an entirely mean-spirited way. And it mostly comes from Raphael, the partner, not Ollie. Something I really like in this book is how it shows different people's reactions and responses to Valentina's strangeness, because she is really strange and she's awkward and she's unaware, and she often blurts out a sentence that just isn't quite right for the conversation but almost makes sense. She can get very caught up in her own little world. It can be difficult to pull her out of it. And of course, the pig facts. Any given opportunity, she is listing off pig facts. Any question she doesn't want to answer or conversation that stresses her out, and she is changing the subject to pig facts. None of this goes unnoticed by the people around her, and of course really impacts the way they speak to her and act around her, and it's often in ways that she doesn't pick up on. It's all shown without any insight from Valentina, leaving it totally up to you to interpret through her matter-of-fact relaying of events, which I actually really like. It's almost putting me in the social situation, trying to parse the impossible cues dropped by everyone else. It's stressful, and it's keeping me very engaged. So for example, her boss, Lauren, treats her very sweetly, but in an infantilizing way. Clara, of course, takes advantage of her vulnerability and has learned the ins and outs of how her mind works to better and more effectively victimize her. And Ollie, the coworker that she spends a lot of her days with, falls into this mix of treating her like he would anyone else, treating her the way he has come to understand she needs, and also sometimes being totally baffled by her and her behavior. Raphael, like I said, is a little bit meaner, as we see at the pub where he's asking her if she's ever had a boyfriend, with a little bit of a smirk on his face that only grows when he sees her discomfort and her quick diversion into pig facts. Ollie's kind of trying to get him to stop, but he's also a little bit entertained by it, not too bothered by his boyfriend's cruel streak, but he's more interested in Valentina's romantic life because he wants her to be happy, and I think that he senses something is wrong in her home without knowing any of the details. The two of them invite her out the following weekend, and she is thrilled at the prospect, never getting to do anything besides sitting at home and doting on Clara, but she knows that Clara won't approve because of a narrative that Clara has created about Valentina's coworkers. Clara once insisted that she come to Valentina's Christmas party, and it seemed like she was having a good time until she came up to Valentina enraged and on the brink of tears, saying that they needed to leave right then. And so they did. They didn't say goodbye to anyone. And Valentina learned that Clara had had an interaction with one of her coworkers who, as Clara says, was mean and made fun of her for her recent divorce and laughed at her Italian accent. Clara was furious, and she decided from then on that any time outside of necessity Valentina spent with her coworkers was an affront to their friendship and a deep personal insult to Clara, because Valentina would be choosing her coworkers over the woman who had done so much for her over the years. But Valentina is hoping that Clara will change her mind if she makes it clear that Ollie and the other coworker, who has not worked there since basically the Christmas party, have nothing to do with each other, and that Ollie was actually asking after Clara. But to do that, she has to get home on time, and she has lost track of time, so she very quickly and awkwardly and in a panic hurries out. And you can assume that the fearful way she does this sets off some alarm bells for Ollie, but it's also kind of hard because Valentina is an intense person who likes things a certain way and very well might be behaving like this without any external pressure. She makes it home on time, and all she can think about is asking Clara if she can go out with Ollie and Raphael again, but she can't bring herself to tell Clara that she went out for pints that afternoon. She's waiting for the perfect moment. She's trying to get Clara in the right mood. Finally, at dinner, Clara has lightened up a little bit, telling stories about her relationship with her ex-husband, Edo, and the travels that they did, and Valentina just blurts it out. And of course, Clara's face goes slack. And then she explodes. She slams her hands onto the table and she shouts about Valentina going out with people who have treated her badly while she's stuck home alone in pain. That is another thing about Clara. There is a new affliction every time Valentina gets home from work. A cold, a sore back, a headache. Always another obligation for Valentina to treat Clara as delicately as possible, for her to do everything Clara wants and more. Clara always has to be in the role of victim of her circumstances, or victim of the world, or victim of her body, so that Valentina's victimhood is less obvious, and she feels compelled to fix the injustice or else be a bad friend and at fault for all of the ways that Clara punishes her. It takes an entire weekend of groveling for Valentina to slowly start working her way out of the hole that Clara has thrown her in, that she believes she has dug herself. And even still, it's hard for her to know if Clara is angry. There's often a lot of silence between the two of them that Valentina is never able to read or understand, and that confuses and distresses her. Back at work, Valentina is avoiding Ollie as best she can. She's giving him a bit of a cold shoulder, and then she's resorting to shutting him out with pig facts whenever he tries to talk to her, so that he doesn't bring up the invitation to go out with him and Raphael again. She'd much rather take this roundabout way of avoiding what she doesn't want to talk about than have to deal with a direct confrontation where she'll need to make some sort of excuse for Clara. She's taking it all on herself so that no one ever confronts her about the relationship with Clara that she knows is at best inappropriate. She would rather personally destroy the relationship between her and Ollie than risk him knowing anything about how Clara treats her. Valentina successfully pushes Ollie away and makes it home in time that night, and we get a little bit of the history between Valentina and Clara. At first, the book has led you to believe that the two of them have been living together for just a couple of years, and then it drops more and more information, and you understand that that wasn't when they met each other. They've known each other for many, many years and grew up together in Rome. A few years back, Valentina's landlord kicked her out to sell the apartment she was in, and she was in a rush looking for somewhere to live, and so Clara offered her a room in the house that she shared with her now ex-husband, Edo. Valentina at first didn't want to, and alluded to some painful past between her and Clara, how they had only recently reconnected, both now living in London, but she moved in, and for a while the three of them got on beautifully. They welcomed her into their home, they went on all these sweet outings together, they had dinner at the table every night, drinking wine and telling stories. She fit right into their lives. And then over time, Clara got more and more volatile, more like the Clara that we know now. She would turn extremely jealous at the drop of a hat. If Valentina laughed at Edo's joke too much or looked at him in the wrong way, if Edo talked about his coworkers when she was already in a bad mood, at this point she is directing most of her anger towards Edo, and they spend long and many nights in screaming matches that Valentina can hear through the wall of her bedroom. After months of this really turbulent energy, Valentina gets home from work one day to find Clara lying on the couch, obviously having been there all day when she should have been at work, and the next day is the same, and also Edo is no longer there. He has been spending as much time as possible away from the house, but he hasn't been home at all. And Clara finally tells Valentina that she ended it all. She quit her job, she kicked Edo out, and it is a little bit uncertain if it was her or Edo who finally called it on their relationship, though. And that was the start of the current setup that Valentina and Clara have, with Clara unemployed and Valentina taking care of her and also having her every move controlled by her. For the rest of part one, it's Valentina moving between work and home and sometimes dropping in little bits of history of her and Clara. Even though it's pretty repetitive, this doesn't really get boring for me because I'm holding on to the belief that this intensity between Valentina and Clara is going to ramp up over the story, and also to the belief that something will break with her other relationships and someone will find out about this. There is a building tension that I believe will pay off, and if it doesn't, I'm going to be so disappointed. I will look back on this time in the book as being stupidly repetitive, but right now I'm just excited to see where it's going to go. It's something that will either work or not, depending on the book, where the book takes us. At work, a customer comes in and asks Valentina for a book about agriculture that, as a pig lover, she doesn't agree with the conclusions of. And she does point him to it because she has to, that's part of her job. But she also lets out an absolutely massive sigh when she does. He questions it and listens to why she doesn't like that specific book, and he takes her recommendations instead. Unlike most other people, this guy actually actively listens to her talk about pigs, and she feels herself letting loose and speaking very quickly and excitedly, but she's getting such a rush from being engaged with on this topic that she can't stop herself, and she's riding this high for the rest of the day. We get a little information drop about Clara that I am conflicted about. Valentina gets a call from her own mother who says she ran into Clara's parents and they haven't heard from her in a couple of months, and she urges Valentina to tell Clara to call her parents, who are worried about her. But Valentina knows she's not going to bring it up because it would put Clara in a horrible mood, unlike anything else. Clara has told her that her family, particularly her mom, was abusive to her, and the way it's told, we are clearly meant to question Clara's narrative of her parental abuse. Valentina is all naive, like, I mean, I've met Clara's mom and she seems really nice to me, like, I can't imagine her being mean to Clara. And she's also like, all Clara told me is that her mom would question her and helicopter parent her, and it caused her trauma, but of course I want to protect her from them. She's the best person in the world. It's framed as though Valentina is giving this contradicting evidence, though I don't really see it as that, though she's not believing that contradicting evidence herself. I think we're meant to take it as we know Clara is unreliable and creates self-serving narratives to get what she wants, and we know that Valentina is truthful. And therefore, if Valentina doesn't think that Clara's mom is capable of this from the superficial interactions they've had, Clara must be lying. If Clara can't give any more evidence about her abuse besides perceived slights in the same way she delusionally perceives slights from others that we've seen, Clara must be lying. I just kind of struggle with questioning her like this, with such limited and circumstantial evidence. It's trying way too hard to make me think something specific that I'm just not primed to think. Not that characters can't lie about being abused, like that's a totally fine character choice. I just want it to be more subtle with what it wants me to think, I guess. It's hard to be pulled down this path that I'm kind of unwilling to go down. So in their life at home, Clara has burrowed herself into her depression nest in the living room. She's not even sleeping in her own bed anymore. Valentina is spending a lot of time and energy trying to figure out a way to get her out of the house or feeling better without upsetting her by phrasing the suggestion wrong. She manages to convince Clara to go for a little outing to buy some silk scarves in Brighton, which is a few train rides away. They have a really nice time. They manage to avoid the crowds with Ollie's pretty detailed instructions that he has given her on how to avoid the crowds because he's gone recently with his boyfriend. Clara has issues with crowds because she hates people, and Valentina does because she hates close proximity and loud noises. The entire time they're in Brighton, there's this simmering tension, this fear that something will go wrong and set Clara off and ruin the progress Valentina has worked so hard to make. Even more so than usual, they're on the precipice of disaster, and it could come from any innocuous moment. It is imminent on this trip to Brighton. When Clara gets the scarves that she wanted, Valentina helps tie one around her neck and she asks how she looks. And Valentina says, "You look like the most beautiful cow in the pasture." And Clara's face drops and she starts raising her voice in public, saying, "Are you calling me a cow?" And Valentina feels this like physically in her body. She gets dizzy and nauseous. She starts trying to scramble. And then Clara breaks into a laugh. Oh, she's just kidding. She just knows exactly what she's like as a person and the fear that she can cause in others. She was just doing it for a reaction, to see the look on Valentina's face. Valentina is too relieved to acknowledge the cruelty of Clara's behavior. You finally stop holding your breath when they get back on the train home after a day of Valentina very carefully pushing Clara to spend a little bit longer out bit by bit. But that train ride home is actually where it all goes to shit. On the train, they're sat across from two women who are holding hands. They ask Clara and Valentina about their trip to Brighton and tell them they're going to London, and they ask Valentina about any clubs that she recommends, which makes Clara snort and then look out the window, and the lesbians pick up on this, and they give each other a look, and then they stop asking questions. And when the train pulls into its destination, they share a very quick peck on the lips, and they get up to leave. Seeing them kiss makes Valentina go bright red and hide her face in her phone, which is like, okay, girl, I know what you are. And it disgusts Clara, who says the whole day is ruined. She can't believe those gays were rubbing it in their faces. And most importantly, she can't believe that Valentina would try to make friends with them, which is the first point that we really see the toxic thinking patterns that Valentina has internalized to make herself feel responsible for every mood Clara gets into. The next day that Valentina has work, Clara comes shuffling into the room, sniffling and coughing, and then sitting down and curling up into a little ball, hugging her knees, saying, "I'm sick. Can you please take care of me?" And Valentina's like, she knows it stresses me out so much to miss work, but Clara is pulling all the big guns. She makes herself so small and tiny and weak that Valentina relents. And as soon as she does, Clara jumps up and down and then blows her a big kiss and leaves the room. Valentina dotes on Clara endlessly, and by the end of the day, she thinks that Clara seems better and she is allowed to go into work the next day, where Ollie tells her that a customer had come in looking specifically for her. It was a man named Marcus, the guy that she talked to at length about the agriculture books and pig facts the other day. She then lets her guard down with Ollie, and he manages to finally get a word in and ask her if she wants to go out with him and his boyfriend that weekend to an escape room. Valentina often has this problem where she gets so caught up in what to say in an uncomfortable, distressing social situation that she's spiraling through all of the ways that she could phrase her response and how she'll be perceived in each scenario. And as she's going through it all, she's so lost in her own mind that her mouth just vomits something out. Here, when Ollie asks her about the escape room, she is panicking, trying to come up with an excuse, and then her mouth just says no. And she is too caught up in the moment to figure out how to walk it back. So it kind of just sits there between them. And then Ollie gives her some grace, gives her an out, and is like, I get it. I don't really like escape rooms either. Raphael just loves them. And Valentina just kind of stutters and then notices the time and rushes out the door. A couple of weeks later, that guy Marcus comes back into the store and he seeks Valentina out again. And he tells her that he works for a publishing company and he wants her to write a book for them about pigs. I am making it sound way more ridiculous than the book does, but if you take a step back and actually look at what happens, that's what happens. Not really buying this one. Not really buying that this would happen. Like, why would it be, hey, woman, I've had one brief conversation with, you should write an entire nonfiction book for the publishers I work for, and not like, will you write us a blog post? Or like, will you write us an essay for an anthology? That's perfect. That's exactly what it should be. As it is, this is egregiously silly in my opinion. It's also where I've begun to roll my eyes a little at this story, which I am still really liking and really interested in, but I do have some issues with. Valentina, not interested in writing this book, though seeing him does remind her of the liberation that she felt when he listened to her talk about the pigs. More than anything, it's just not something that she has imagined for herself before, and thinking about it for the first time now, she's really full of doubt and insecurity and the conviction that she was made to sell books and could never do what the authors that she's surrounded by do. She politely but firmly, and of course a little awkwardly, rejects him and moves on to other customers, but he manages to get her to at least take his business card. Ollie begs and pesters for her to tell him what that was all about, but she refuses. She does, unfortunately, that night tell Clara, who, to no one's surprise, blows up at her. She takes the approach of like, why would you want to do that? Why would you want more money? Is there something that you're missing in your life? Am I not enough for you? And then Clara knows that she's pushed it too far, so she goes into self-pitying mode, apologizing and saying that she knows she's a burden, so that Valentina then has to monologue about how perfect she is and how easy it is to live with her and how she loves taking care of her and how much Clara has done for her. Back at work, she's learned that Ollie and Raphael have broken up, and she's struggling to know how to be there for him. She spends a lot of time in her own head trying to figure out the right thing to do and like solving complex equations to decipher what others need from her. And the longer the book goes on, the more flat that depiction of that aspect of Valentina gets. There's a really good example of it here where she says that being there for someone, as she's learned, is not somehow magically fixing whatever is wrong, but physically being there, which I like and actually made me step back and be like, oh my God, that is what being there for someone is. But then she says, all you need to do is listen and apparently not tell them pig facts, because apparently that doesn't help. This is happening more frequently where it's telling instead of showing. And it also can't decide on how naive and unaware its character is. At the beginning, Valentina was obviously weird to us as the reader and not quite skating by unnoticed in her weirdness in her everyday life, while she was like internally struggling immensely to follow the rules and control others' perception of her. This is still true as the book goes on, but it's become far more heavy-handed, where before I really appreciated the subtlety and being left to interpret her thoughts and behaviors myself. It's just like a lot of plainly stated, this is how other people think I should behave. This is something I've been told is weird. And if you're gonna do that, I want more from Valentina about how she feels about these things. I want her to question them or something, anything. Right now, it's feeling like it's just inputting a stereotype of what an autistic character would think with really no greater depth. And I think it does a disservice to depicting these struggles when there isn't an emotional layer to how she's impacted by social standards that she doesn't understand. I think there's a marked decline in the quality and complexity of the writing of Valentina's world that is slowly turning her into a caricature, and also making the writing really repetitive, because part of this gradually less nuanced voice has also been her repeating back what people say to her in conversation without really adding anything or even really ever misinterpreting. It's like the only way it knows how to show us Valentina's matter-of-fact and kind of one layer removed approach to talking to people is by having her directly relay what was just said. But there are so many other ways to do that that don't involve me reading the same sentiments twice in a row. Like here, after a little bit of listening to Ollie's relationship woes, he wants to be distracted, and he begs Valentina to tell him what it was that Marcus wanted. When she does, he gets really excited, and he pushes her to take him up on the offer. Ollie says, "You're weirdly good at all this pig stuff, and now even a professional is saying it. Think about it." She says, "Fine, fine," and then thinks, "It's nice to hear Ollie say he thinks I'm good at the pig stuff. He seems genuinely convinced I can do this, too." I don't need to hear that again. Simply and honestly, this is not very good writing. It's just telling me what to think. And like I said, she's never misinterpreting these repetitive parts. There's no intrigue. There's no characterization with this. In pushing her to write a book about pigs, Ollie gets himself a little worked up. He wants her to believe in herself. He knows on some level that there is someone, even if it's just Valentina, who is shrinking her down and making her scared and small and unable to imagine or accept good things coming into her life. And that is my interpretation of Ollie's actions. That's something that I see, but Valentina doesn't. And it is way more interesting than any of the sentences where she just directly says, this is what was said and this is what I feel about it. And even then it's not even feel, it's this is what was said and this is what I think about it. Another problem I have here is that for some reason, at some point off page, Valentina's hesitancy about Marcus's offer turns from disinterest and self-doubt to suspicion. It's a completely random switch that you would not have anticipated with her initial reaction to Marcus. I think it might just be the only way the author knew how to get Valentina to start slowly changing her mind. Ollie looks up the name on the card that Marcus left and he's like, look, it's a real person. It's a real publishing company. And that's the thing that pushes her to start reconsidering what it would mean to take him up on this. It's pretty confusing and frustrating to have the character motivations carelessly thrown around so much in a book like this that takes place almost entirely inside the narrator's head. But anyway, that and Ollie's encouragement causes Valentina to start seriously considering it. She gets caught up in it enough that she loses track of time, and she gets home late to the explosive anger of Clara, who this time screams at and berates her immediately. She calls her disgusting and useless and ungrateful and pathetic, and then she says, Edo was right. Valentina, you are a poison. And after she says that actually is a really good example of Valentina's way too matter-of-fact, point-by-point inner monologue that I understand the intentions of, but is not really adding anything to my reading experience, okay? Listen, I can't remember him ever saying anything like this, but maybe it wasn't me he said it to. And why would he? He never owed me anything. I was always just Clara's childhood friend. I know I was around a lot during their first few years together in London, and the three of us were almost inseparable at some point. It must have been too much for them. And yet Edo was always so kind and welcoming to me. Okay, so I already know all of that information. I don't know exactly how I want this rewritten, but I don't think it's very effectively communicating the patterns and paths that her mind takes as she lands on a conclusion, which is something that it was doing at the start of the book. Clara storms into her room and they spend the night apart, but Valentina is kept afloat by thinking about the nice things that Ollie said about her and how she has two people in the world who believe in her. And this compels her to try and write some stuff about pigs. And she sits down at her desk and it all just flows out easily. And when she's done, she sends it to Ollie, who responds to her like, oops, I might have just accidentally forwarded that to Marcus at the publishing company. And that is where part 1 ends. And part 2, I can see, goes back almost 10 years to when Valentina was a teenager living in Rome. This is one of those books where I just really appreciate the premise, and I'm so excited by the premise. I want to pick it up. I want to see where it goes next. But depending on how it ends, where it takes me, will really influence how I feel about it. And I think that's because the writing is not necessarily exceptional. I know this is probably not going to be a 5-star book unless it absolutely shocks me and leaves me thinking about it for months on end. I have some issues, but I'm still really liking it, and I'm going to go read some more of it. Probably I'll read part 2 and then get back to you. I'll see you then. All right, I am now done with part 2 of Pig, which is about as long as the first part and takes place in Clara and Valentina's teenage years. I once again have some middling feelings. I understand that this context is important, and I have liked seeing the development of their relationship, but I am also so invested in the current day timeline. And these past stories, they're told in a series of vignettes, which is just never really my favorite and makes it really hard for me to connect to it, especially when I just want to get back to the current day timeline so badly. Let's just get into it. Like I think I said last time, we are in Rome and it's 2010, and the narrator throughout this part is a little bit unsure of how she's telling this story. It starts with her saying that she currently lives in Rome and has for the last 3 years, but the first real narrative we get here doesn't take place there. It's years earlier, before her family had moved to the city. It's kind of atmospheric as she's detailing her alone but not lonely, barefooted childhood adventures through the woods and pastures surrounding her home during the summer months. Valentina has always been a solitary child obsessed with the natural world. Her first thing was ferns. Her life goal was to find every single fern out in the wild. But that all changed when she met a pig. Her dad took her to his friend's farm when she was maybe like 10 or 11. I promise I pay attention, just not to that kind of stuff. Doesn't really matter. She was in her preteen years. Maybe it said it directly. I don't know if I care enough to go back and find out. So they got a tour of the farm by the owner, Angela, and it was love at first sight with Angela's pigs. Valentina was shocked and enthralled by how different they were to her expectation that had been set up with cartoons and children's books of pigs as these like cute little pink things. On looking in their eyes, she could tell immediately how intelligent they were, which rings true for anyone who has met a pig, and it's honestly actually freaky as fuck. Valentina was especially drawn to the pigs because of how this intelligence and expressiveness and wisdom that she saw in them contrasted against society's perception of pigs as dirty creatures. With how deep she describes this initial bond as being, I was expecting, and I think I would have liked to see some really high emotions when her dad tries to take her home. She does say that she has to force herself away, but I want her to be genuinely difficult here. I want to see her extremely dysregulated. I want her to struggle. I want everyone around her to react to her as though she's too old to be behaving like this. I know that makes me sound like a sadist, but please hear me out. In a lot of ways, the problems Valentina has have been very internal and therefore pretty palatable, relatively palatable. And there was a good opportunity to change that up a little here, in a way I think would have deepened the depiction of Valentina's relationship, even just to her family or her father, but also to herself and her obsessions. So Valentina starts working with Angela during the summers, an arrangement set up by her parents so that they can offload their kid with her endless questions about pigs onto someone with the knowledge to answer those questions. That makes it sound meaner and like worse parenting than what it actually is. They're trying to give her access to something that she spends most of her time thinking about, while also kind of like setting her up for success, giving her experience working. They do tell her quite sternly that you have to make sure your questions do not disrupt Angela's work, or you won't be able to visit the farm anymore and you'll be sent home. So this is of course the best thing that's ever happened in Valentina's life. Her love for and obsession with pigs didn't grow over time. It came to her fully formed. And here she is, allowed to spend like 8 hours a day in their vicinity while also keeping herself busy with farm work, which is something that she loves doing. And then it's all ripped away from her when the worst thing that's ever happened in her life happens, and her parents announce that they're moving to the city, tearing her from her life's passion. They're doing this partly because of her dad's work, but also, as they admit to her, because they think it will do her some good to spend more time around humans and get her mind off the pigs a little. This kind of tears a rift between them, and it's easy to empathize with both sides here, I think. Her parents do not understand her, and she doesn't understand them, and they are both breaking each other's hearts because of it. In the city, Valentina's social struggles are magnified. She was the weird girl in the countryside, but everyone was a little bit weird, and they didn't pay her all that much attention. In Rome, her peers immediately pick up on her social incompetence and awkwardness and pig obsession, because she will talk about pigs to literally anyone. She will always give a pig fact, and the bullying is brutal from everyone, boys and girls across all rungs of the social ladder. She's miserable, and she is miserable for years, until, in her mind, Clara saves her. Like I said, this is mostly all being told in vignettes. So what we get is the scene where she's writhing around in bed in the heat and she wants ice cream. And she's convincing herself that she can get to the ice cream shop and get home safely without running into anyone from school. She's thinking about how most kids' parents wouldn't let them out on a school night, and how if they were out, it was really unlikely that they'd be hanging out at the ice cream shop. They'd probably be in a more common teenage hangout spot, which she'll take the back roads to avoid on her way there. But then, of course, when she gets there, she sees a group of kids her age hanging around outside, and her stomach drops. And it is very visceral if you've ever been in a remotely similar situation to her. She slips by them, but she does hear the little whispers and giggles that she knows are directed towards her. It's hard for her to focus in the ice cream shop, to play out the script that she had planned in her head. And even like she asks for a cup and they give her a cone, but she's already turned to leave. And then when she turns to leave, there are two kids her age standing right behind her, between her and the door, trapping her. The two kids are Edo and Clara. Edo and Valentina's parents are friends, so she does know him, but this is her first real interaction with Clara in her life. Edo and Clara pretend like they're not cornering her, like their bodies are not between her and the door, like she doesn't back up into the counter when she runs into them. And she, of course, does not pick up on any of the smirks they're sharing or the underlying cruelty that you as the reader know is present in Clara's tone as she asks innocent enough questions about like what kind of ice cream Valentina got. Under the guise of total integrity and friendliness, they bring her back to their group and introduce her, and pretty instantly they all start laying in on her, making fun of Edo because she used to be his girlfriend just because their parents are friends. Clara partakes in this, but after a minute or two, she redirects everyone to make fun of one of the guys for like being obsessed with Edo and therefore gay. And that is the point where Valentina becomes obsessed with Clara, almost to the degree where it takes over the pig stuff, but of course nothing could completely overshadow pigs for her. Clara comes close, however. None of her peers have ever stood up for her like that, or showed her any positive attention, or acknowledged even subtly the way other people treat her. And Clara has also seen something in Valentina. In the next chapter, they're at a school assembly because one of their teachers has died, and students are giving eulogies, and Clara pushes through the crowd to stand next to Valentina and whisper mean things about these students giving the eulogies. Valentina laughs and plays along, but then she also offers empathy. Like, yeah, it's funny, but also it must be hard to get up there in front of everyone. And she can see that this has flipped that switch in Clara and made her instantly angry. So Valentina scrambles to get back in her good graces by taking on this mean girl persona. Valentina is relieved when Clara brightens back up, but she is just relieved, and I would have loved to see a little bit of inner conflict with this. It doesn't even need to come up right in this moment. I get that she would be really wrapped up in trying to please Clara in these first few interactions, that it might not matter how she got to the point of pleasing Clara. But I think there's a really interesting avenue to explore that goes completely ignored here with Valentina's morals. And actually, this is present throughout the book, where she, in the current day, is like forced to lie to people that she cares about, either to keep them happy in Clara's case, or to hide Clara from them. And she does feel some conflicting feelings about this, but it's mostly a throwaway line here or there, like, I don't like lying, but I have to. I would love, especially here when they're kids, to see Valentina questioning who she is and who she is becoming through what Clara wants. This also could maybe just be a personal thing. When I was a kid, I had a very strict moral code and like sense of fairness and justice that other kids picked up on. There was a time that I remember very vividly where one of the popular kids said that I could be friends with them if I said fuck. And being forced to make that decision like literally destroyed me. This was 16 or 17 years ago, and I still remember how that felt. Like what it was like to be asked to abandon something that I felt so strongly about and that I tied so closely to my perception of my own goodness, which was a massive value of mine, but also wanting to be accepted and loved and to experience connection like any human being does. From what I know about Valentina, I think that this exploration would have fit really well and would give her obsession and desire to please Clara another facet that could have created a lot of depth. I think I really, at the end of the day, I just want to see Valentina actually impacted by the choices that she makes that go against her values. And I don't think that that is too much to ask. Because what we get instead is pretty flat. Valentina feels saved by Clara and will do whatever Clara asks. And while we understand her motivations, we don't understand how she feels about them. The two girls become closer and closer until Clara abandons the rest of her friend group to solely focus on Valentina, from who she can get the attention and devotion and control that she requires. And Valentina is even more under Clara's thumb because of this, because she has seen Clara's capacity to easily throw away friendships and move on to the next best thing. It is the perfect storm for their relationship to fester and to grow the foundations for what it will be in the future. Though there is a part here that I think really clashes with what we've seen in the present day section, where Clara first reveals her mom's abuse to Valentina. And again, it's this thing of like, she abuses me, but the only details I'll give are pretty standard rifts that happen in many non-abusive mother-teenager relationships, and you as the audience are meant to understand me as being a liar or an exaggerator, which I still just like personally don't love. But narratively, I don't love that Valentina is immediately willing to accept Clara's story, and like that is meant to be naive. We're meant to see that as naive. She is fully on board, totally on Clara's side, talking about like, I hate your mom, she's horrible, I'm so sorry. The reason I don't like this is because I think it makes it even more unlikely that as an adult, she would sort of frame Clara as being a liar. Remember, she said, like, I would never expect her mom to do anything like that. She seemed nice to me, but I love Clara, so I believe her. I don't see the transition from how she thinks of it as a child to how she thinks of it as an adult. I just don't buy it. I do question this whole thing. It's really trying to force me to think a certain way about this abuse claim, and it's just not the way I usually think about abuse claims, even if the person is a bad person who abuses others. Again, just to be clear, I don't care, and I think it's fine if it ends up being that Clara is lying about this. I just don't like that the book is trying to make me think a certain way about it ahead of time. All right, so after a while of living in a dream world where nobody bothers her at school anymore and Clara has given her a sense of worth, Valentina is devastated and terrified and extremely insecure when Clara starts to withdraw. She has no idea what she's done wrong or how to fix it, and she tortures herself over it, reading into everything, questioning her own version of events, and if it's even true that Clara is pulling back, waiting around to pick up any little crumb that Clara will throw her way, and trying not to, but constantly asking Clara if she's okay or if Valentina has done anything to upset her, which just irritates Clara, because to be fair to Clara, that is irritating, and I like seeing Valentina as being kind of wrong here. She gets a little bit more wrong. She has been our weird and awkward, but also morally correct protagonist for this entire book. And while Clara withdrawing, of course, hurts her deeply, as it would anyone, forcing someone to repeatedly reconfirm your innocence and abate your insecurities is very difficult and annoying. But Valentina is just so affected by Clara's absence, she cannot let it go, and she has no skills. There's nothing that she's built up over her very solitary life that would give her any guidance on how to deal with this issue. So she does the wrong thing, and you know it's the wrong thing as soon as she thinks it. She goes to Clara's house in the evening on a school night with no warning, just showing up completely out of the blue to once again ask if she has done anything wrong. Clara is not happy, as we expect her to be. She is cold and she comes outside, but she sits quietly smoking her cigarette. And then finally, after a little while, she admits to Valentina that she has been seeing Edo. When she starts talking about him, she lightens up, and then she's glowing, and then she's so excited to be spilling the beans on this relationship where, as she says, she is in love. She's in love for the first time in her life. Valentina is stunned into silence, and she falls apart as she realizes what this will mean for her one and only human connection. She turns around and walks back home without really saying anything. Actually, no, she gets on her moped, because everybody has mopeds. Is that actually true in Italy? All of the teenagers, like all these 14-year-olds have a moped? Is a moped not what I think it is? Without Clara in her life constantly anymore, Valentina becomes the toxic one. She just stews and rages and thinks about how Clara just needs to see that she would have all she needs with just Valentina, that Valentina will do everything for her. almost in the same, like, how could you ever want for more way that Clara directs towards her in the present day, but Valentina doesn't have any outlet for these feelings. She is so desperate and lonely, and it is still very easy to empathize with her, while at the same time there is a little more complexity and nuance to her character. And I really appreciate that we have finally moved past the fear of showing Valentina as anything other than a perfect victim. It's no longer just simply, oh, poor Valentina, which is great. That gets old. Let her be wrong. Let her be toxic. It makes me like her even more to see her thinking all these hateful thoughts about Edo because he's stolen what she thinks should be hers. Without Clara by her side, the bullying has started back up, and she is once again spending most of her time thinking about and obsessing over pigs and telling people pig facts whenever they will listen. There isn't any bad blood between the two of them, but Clara just about completely ignores her until one day she calls and asks to go to the cafe together, which is beyond thrilling for Valentina. At the cafe, Clara spends the entire time talking about Edo and how perfect he is and how they're going to get married one day, and then she drops in the little detail that he's currently gone away with his parents. The only reason that she's paying Valentina any attention. She just cycles through the people in her life when she needs someone to entertain and flatter her. And of course, as soon as he gets back, Valentina is once again demoted. By their final year in high school, it gets to where all she knows about Clara is gossip that she overhears, which she doesn't want to listen to because it hurts her, but she can't help it because it means that she can pretend her and Clara are still friends and she hasn't received all of this information secondhand. She overhears someone at one point talking about how Edo is planning on moving away for university and Clara isn't going with him, and Valentina clings onto this. She keeps all of her summer plans open, hoping that Edo will move away and she'll be able to spend the summer with Clara. She doesn't even plan to go work on the pig farm. She also changes her university plans. She applies to where Clara has always talked about wanting to go. She even tries to convince herself that she would enjoy the architecture program that Clara wants to attend, even though she has truly no interest. So their high school has some tradition of the graduating class jumping in some local fountain after their exams, and even Valentina takes part in this. Then the cops show up, everybody runs soaking wet into the park, and as she's running, Clara grabs onto Valentina's hand and leads her to a hiding spot. This is the first time that they've really spoken in months, and also, importantly, Valentina feels an electric current running up her arm from where Clara is holding her hand, and she wonders if this is how Clara feels with Edo. They get to this hiding spot, and Clara tells Valentina that Edo has asked her to move away for university, as you are very much expecting to happen, and she has accepted, and also they're probably going to get married soon. Valentina, stunned into silence as she always is in these moments, and then her mouth starts working before her brain can, and she screams at Clara that she's fucking stupid, that Clara shouldn't just do what Edo wants and should instead do what Valentina wants and stay in Rome because that's where Valentina is. And then she's just shouting like, stay with me, it's not fair, I'm here, why would you leave me? For some reason though, it fades to black here. I would have really liked to see Clara's response to that from Valentina, which is so out of character for her. And so exactly what we know Clara would never accept from someone else, like someone kind of standing up to her, opposing her decision, calling her relationship into question, and also being pathetic and clingy about it. If the book wanted to leave it for us to imagine, I'm happy with that too. We know Clara well enough at this point, though I will say we don't know her all that well as she was as a teenager, because this part, again, is vignettes that don't really inherently by their nature show us much of an arc. But the book doesn't do that either. The chapter ends, and then on the next page it starts with her saying Clara was angry and she yelled back at me, but I don't remember it because I was too stunned at the information I'd just learned and my own uncontrollable reaction to it. I hated that. I just didn't like that choice. Either show me or don't. This next chapter is a short chapter that just involves some very much not so subtle allusions to Valentina being in love with Clara, but not understanding what love between two girls is or what it looks like to have a crush on your best friend, like uncertainty on how to differentiate those feelings and like what other people feel and what to label this. She's got a summer fully open to her and she spends it rotting away in bed, thinking about Clara, fantasizing about Clara, obsessing over Clara, and running her fingers over specific spots in her sheets until they're worn away to nothing. At the end of the summer, her parents drag her out of her room to attend her cousin's wedding, where she meets a woman who invites her to come and work in London. She spends the night at the wedding thinking about it, and then she says yes, and that is how she ends up in London. I thought this sucked. I really, really wanted her to follow Edo and Clara wherever they went. She is so hung up on the idea that when Clara leaves town, there won't even be a chance of them running into each other. And there's already a precedent that has been set of her being willing to uproot her whole life for a chance at Clara's attention, with her applying to architecture school. Give me more of Valentina being in the wrong, please. I want her to make me feel uncomfortable. I want to feel an internal conflict happening inside her head. I also find this to be an extremely unlikely decision from her in this moment. At this wedding, she had been thinking about her obsessions because of the bride having this thing with only wearing the color purple, but then tradition having won over and her wearing a white dress, but compromising with like a purple sash. This isn't like a compromise though. This is an abandonment of her obsessions. It's not like she's going to work in London and work with pigs. I don't buy this sudden switch up, at the very least without some deeper thought put into it or distress about it. I also just like want you to take the more interesting route for the story. If it ends up being a coincidence that they both live in London, I'm gonna be so pissed off. I'm gonna be punching the wall. I will try and hold out hope that there will be something more interesting with that crossing of life paths that happens with them, but right now I'm just like, ugh. Could have been so good. I also kind of feel like it cut me off from Valentina's younger years at what is really the most interesting part so far, where her love for Clara is twisting into something more dark and destructive. While I am happy to get back to the present day, I'm not super satisfied with how the backstory was paced or presented. Like I've said many times, vignettes are not my preferred method of storytelling, and they only exacerbated the feeling that this middle part was padding to lengthen an otherwise pretty short main story. All the information that we got from these vignettes could have been provided through flashbacks or memories, and we would be in the same place. There was also this strangeness where the author could not decide on the voice in these sections. The tense absolutely all over the place. Sometimes it feels retrospective from Clara as an adult. Sometimes it feels retrospective as in like a diary, like it will literally start with Clara called me today, and then sometimes it's in present tense, and there is no rhyme or reason for any of it. It is extremely inconsistent in a very distracting way, and means that I struggle to place this in the greater context of the story. I don't know which Valentina is speaking to me when she's telling me these stories from her past. Or from the present, because sometimes it's present tense. I want to be clear, it is so much easier to articulate my complaints than what I like in a book that I feel sort of meh on, but I am overall enjoying this still. While I think there's room for them to be more layered and complex, the characters are well developed enough to keep me very interested in them and engaged in their story. I feel invested in this, that is not an easy feat. Not having read the last part, I really don't know where this story is going to go and how I'm going to feel about it, which I like. It's keeping me on my toes. I still feel like it has the potential to be a book that I highly recommend at the end, or to be some like love yourself, don't let anyone abuse you story that's just like full of empty, meaningless platitudes that will piss me off by squandering its boundless potential because this premise just kills. I like that I feel driven to read this book because of both a curiosity about where the story will go and about how it will handle where the story will go. That is always appealing to me. I hope that it goes really well and I come back to you after the last 100 pages feeling thrilled and satisfied. I will see you then. We have finished the book. I was really hoping that this would be a win, you guys. I really wanted it to work. Veronica Rimo blurbed this, and she wrote Lost on Me, and I think I noticed her blurb partway through, and it convinced me that I liked this book more than I did. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about what happens in the last 100 pages of Pig. Part 3 takes us back to Valentina in the present day, finally, where it is a couple of months later and she's struggling to write her book in moments away from Clara, which is typically at night when Clara is sleeping and when Valentina should be sleeping. She's loving writing, she's doing it as much as she can, which means neglecting her own mind and body. And Ollie, her coworker, notices, and he finally questions Valentina about Clara in a very outright and direct and stubborn way. He is openly suspicious, trying to get Valentina to see what he sees. And what he sees is very little of the story, and yet he still knows something is wrong, enough that he's willing to express his concern very explicitly and kind of badger her. While I should be relieved to see someone finally trying to get through to her, I should be on the edge of my seat hoping that she really hears him and devastated when she shuts him out and continues to justify her relationship with Clara. I do not feel any of this, because this conversation is stretched out beyond belief. And this is the pattern for the rest of the book, unfortunately. Mostly mundane, but sometimes mildly significant, maybe 5-minute long conversations will take entire chapters to get through, because after every sentence, Valentina has at least 3 paragraphs of observation and interpretation to bang out, most of which is the author hitting us over the head with a baseball bat of my character is supposed to be autistic, and removing any and all subtlety or room for reader interpretation or understanding or speculation. Though Valentina is sometimes wrong about how she interprets social situations, most of the time all this internal narration serves to do is show us over and over again that she has a very formulaic and matter-of-fact way of thinking. That is it. It's the majority of the book, and it all has the same purpose. And it's done with such simplicity and lack of deliberation that it doesn't even build out the character. It makes her feel all the more flat and unnuanced. It caricaturizes her, not characterizes her. And I cannot emphasize this enough, it is most of the book. So no, I don't feel anything during this important conversation with Ollie because I can't, because the pacing is non-existent. He'll say something that should be a big moment in Valentina's journey of either breaking free from Clara's grasp or further succumbing to it, and then we'll just meander through Valentina's head for 3 pages before the next line of dialogue. How could I ever feel the necessary tension that should exist in this scene? And also maybe a more personal issue, by the time we get back to the conversation, I've forgotten what was last said. Except for in moments where she does my very least favorite thing in this book, which is where Ollie or someone else will say something, and she will repeat back what they said, and then give her opinion on whether it's right or wrong. Repetition in the way of being told something twice, especially when that second time also comes with a handholdy push for you to interpret something a certain way, I think has to be my least favorite quirk in a book. I want you to let me think. I want you to let me care. I can't do that if you don't allow me to use my brain. At one point in here, she just outright thinks, it's like there's this big jumbled mess in my head. And it's like, oh my God, I know. All you have done is show me that, and now we're just saying it? I know I'm always saying show, don't tell, but if it would have saved me dozens of pages of nothing, I would have preferred we just got this out of the way like this at the start. When they're finally done talking, Valentina has taken it to heart that if she isn't able to make more time to write her book, she'll be behind schedule. And remember that schedule thing, because Matilde Pratesi won't. So she decides that day that after work, she'll go to the pub and work on her book. And I know what you're thinking, because I thought the same thing. What the fuck? What changed? What is happening? All of a sudden, you're just gonna go and do something that will make you late to get home? It's not even framed as like a rebellion, which I guess could be almost believable. No, she's like, I'll tell Clara I'm going to the supermarket, but instead, I'm gonna go to the pub and get some writing done? As if a risk-benefit analysis is not something we know this character would be doing. Like, sure, she says, I'm going to the big supermarket far away, but how much writing time could that possibly buy you? And then she texts it to Clara, but doesn't get an answer before going ahead and doing it? Who is this woman? This is frustrating. This is not the character I know, and this is not the fear I know, and this does not fit within the really rigid boundaries of what is acceptable in their dynamic. It's especially frustrating because it feels like something has changed in the months that we missed, but it isn't acknowledged or addressed in any way. The time we lost both meant something and nothing. To be so entwined within these women's lives and relationships, exposed to every minute detail for 200 pages, if something radically changes, I want to know. I actually would like for it to happen on page and for me to be able to see it and be part of it, but if you're not going to do that, you at least have to tell me that it happened or show me that it happened. We can't have absolutely everything being the exact same except for like the most fundamental part of the book and the character. The very first introduction we get to her, she cannot be late. Now it's fine. Now it's fine? Have we just entered into another universe? It is so ridiculous to me. I think this is really the point where any and all tension or stakes are thrown out the window, especially because of what happens next. As you expect, Valentina gets caught up in her writing. She's so sucked into it that she looks up and realizes 2 hours have gone by. She packs up and heads home, not even in a panic. It takes her ages to wonder how she'll come up with an excuse as to why she was at the grocery store for 2 fucking hours, as if this woman, who has expressed, albeit very flatly, a clear discomfort with lying, would not be thinking about the lies that she's told in regards to her imminent arrival home. But then she gets home, and Clara is passed out drunk on the couch. You think that this is some sort of punishment for Valentina being hours late, but it isn't. Valentina checks Clara's phone and sees that she hasn't opened the message saying that she's going to the store and she'll be late, and so she just deletes it on the assumption that Clara has been passed out for hours and hours since before Valentina should have arrived home, and then this never comes up again. That is where you really know that there is very little at stake. Sure, yes, her mental health and her self-confidence are at stake, and those are important, but in a book about a roommate so controlling that she writes notes telling you what to eat and where, that's not enough. That is not enough. and yet the consequences of Clara's control never materialize outside of Valentina's own head. In one swift move, any and all tension is destroyed. Valentina will never be made to suffer in any permanent way. She will always come out okay. And so what does it even matter what ends up happening in the interim? In the next chapter, her mom calls and tells her that Clara's mom is really worried because she heard from Edo recently, who told her that Clara had become increasingly violent and unstable. But Clara won't answer her mom's calls. Valentina had wanted to tell her mom about the book that she's writing on this call, but all the talk of Clara makes her realize that she can't risk doing that it would be more likely to get back to Clara, who still has no idea that she's writing the book and would freak out if she did. There is a lot, and I cannot understate how much I mean when I say a lot, of thinking about and mulling over and coming back to the need to but fear of telling Clara about the book. Of course, this would take up a lot of space in her mind. Clara and her book are the two main things in her life, and they conflict greatly. But without that tension that we've lost, I just don't really care, do I? Clara will find out at one point. She'll be angry. Nothing will really end up coming of it, you know? That is such a disappointing feeling to have midway through a book with a premise that is so insanely up your alley. A book that you really thought was going to have you absolutely hooked the entire time. I really, really, really wanted to love this one, and I really thought I was going to. At work, the bookshop is in the red and has been for months, so Lauren, her boss, decides that to remedy that, they're going to open a cafe in the back. Sure. Lauren has hired a new cafe manager, someone named Kai, who is non-binary. This is Valentina's first ever encounter with the concept of being outside the gender binary, and she does not fucking get it. And I think it's kind of funny the way it shows us how she doesn't get it. Like, that can be sort of demonized as a problematic ignorance, but sometimes that ignorance is funny. Like, it just simply doesn't click for her. But she doesn't want to look ignorant, so she stays quiet when Lauren is telling them about Kai, and when Ollie notices and explains what non-binary is, she's like, obviously I know what non-binary is. And then she waits for a beat and she goes, but are they male or female? There's something a little funny about it. It does end up clicking for her. This isn't some huge ongoing thing where she's like always stumbling over pronouns or guessing Kai's sex at birth, which feels maybe like a little bit unbalanced. I appreciate why the author might not want to do that or write it that way, but it also feels a little bit inauthentic to Valentina's character and her initial reaction to not give her any complex feelings about it at all after this point. Kai's gender is a kind of jumping off point for Valentina to think a little bit more about social rules and boundaries and structures and freedom that she might be missing because she's tied herself to these things that a lot of the time she doesn't even understand. It's not really an awakening for her in any way. It's more so a reason for her to remember how moving to London and moving away from the more strict customs of Italian society was very freeing for her. And it's for us to see how she has lost that freedom, how that Italian rigidity that she speaks of has been reintegrated into her life through Clara. Clara, who, of course, thinks that being non-binary is weird and gross and ridiculous. But Clara does seem to kind of pick up on the reverence that Valentina speaks of Kai with, so she turns up the manipulation. A couple of minutes later, she starts crying and talking about how her parents won't stop calling her and they're so horrible. And she says, it's so hard coming from basically a broken home, which her parents are together. It's pretty clearly alluding to that with the basically qualifier, but Valentina, because she has to over-explain everything to us, says that Clara's parents are still together, so she's technically wrong to call it a broken home. But then she goes, of course, I would never understand, and I'm just tired of this pattern with Valentina's thoughts on Clara. It's like sapping all of the humanity out of Valentina because it prefers for us to never be able to forget that she is naive. And like, she can be naive about this. She can, but for that portrayal to always be her telling us what we already know about Clara being untruthful or manipulative, and then immediately shutting it down and going, but she would never, or, but she's right, with no further thought on her part. Like, what about Valentina thinking, maybe Clara meant this, but she said the wrong thing, or, why would Clara say that if it was untrue? Or literally anything else. I will say it again. Valentina feels like a caricature. There's a part in here where Valentina remembers when Clara moved to town and how it felt to reconnect, and I was right to be mad earlier. It was a complete coincidence. Totally inconsequential that they both immigrated to the same city. That enrages me. Could you not have done something with that? At the time, Valentina was very anxious, but also very happy to see Clara and was easily pulled back into her life, especially because of all the big feelings she had about being abandoned by her only friend as a teenager that had been pushed down and left unaddressed. But it is essentially the most boring storyline that it could be with them ending up together here. I feel like there was intrigue surrounding this created at the beginning where it slowly revealed that Clara and Valentina had a history, but then after over 200 pages, the history is just like the most basic, simple, dull story it could be. They both coincidentally ended up in London. Whoopee. I'm so excited to learn this. In the present day, Valentina's life outside her home is getting better. The cafe opens and she learns that she's really good at making coffee, which is another step in her accepting that she is more than just Clara's caretaker and a woman obsessed with pigs. There's also a subtle as a hammer chemistry between her and Kai, where she's like, I usually can't stand human touch, but it's different with Kai. Like, when Kai touches my arm, it feels good. And sure, I get that that can happen, but damn, is it uninteresting? How about, like, let's navigate what it means for Valentina to experience a crush in a society that elevates physical contact as the main form of expressing desire? What if she liked it because she likes Kai, but also didn't like it because it overwhelms her to be touched, and that caused an internal struggle and confusion about her feelings? What if Kai tried to comfort her with a touch in a moment where she couldn't handle it, and she snapped, and they had to have a conversation, and Valentina was tasked with articulating her boundaries? We have space to do things like this. 90% of this book is her thoughts, and 70% of those thoughts are just rephrasing the same thing, the sentence that someone has just said to her. We could have fit something a little more interesting in there, I think. Maybe we could have afforded to move some stuff around for something a little more interesting. Okay, so remember how I told you about how Ollie was telling Valentina that she was off schedule for the book, and she thought, he's right. At this pace, I am off schedule for the book. Yeah, there is no schedule for the book. I don't want to make any sweeping statements about publishing as someone who has never been in that space and doesn't plan on it, but I have a feeling that if someone who had written and published a nonfiction book read this story, I think that they would have an aneurysm. None of it seems right to me, okay? And maybe I'm completely off base. I totally could be. The fact that she was just picked up off the street, she just writes as well. Like, there's no research or planning or organization, and the publishers seem willing to sit around forever waiting for her. They haven't given her even an idea of a timeline for when she needs to submit her manuscript. Like, is this a joke? That doesn't sound right. Am I crazy? Ollie and Valentina still talk about it with words like being on time, but they also say things like the publishers probably want the manuscript one of these days. Sometime soon they're probably expecting my manuscript. What? But she doesn't have time to catch up on writing, though, to be clear, there isn't really any stress involved because there isn't even the concept of a deadline. She doesn't have time to write until Clara needs to go to Italy because Edo has a new woman and he wants to finalize their divorce. She leaves like very all of a sudden. Valentina comes home from work to find her packing a suitcase with her flight in a couple of hours. And something that frustrates me is that Clara says, I've written you 2 weeks of notes in case I'm gone longer than we expect. You'll have to pick one each morning. Okay. Oh my God, I don't even want to get started on this. Would you not say that a massive part of the horror and discomfort of your roommate leaving you a note telling you what to wear each morning is the fact that you don't talk about it? It's this rule that she enacts and you follow with no words exchanged. Isn't that the whole thing that makes it what it is? In my eyes, it's a completely different story if Clara verbally tells Valentina what to wear and what to eat. There's something about like the quiet, private contemplation of her writing that note alone in the kitchen at night. There's something about the ability to ignore or pretend you didn't see the note in a way that you can't if it's something that the two of you talk about. There's something about the innocuousness of a little slip of paper and how much power that fragile thing holds. There's something about the lack of obvious consequences of not following it that makes Valentina's adherence to it all the more frightening and sad. I hate that they talk about it here. It strips all of that away from me, and the only real reason that they talk about it is to cover the holes in the story. But Clara could have just left this stack of notes in the kitchen. Nothing would have changed, and yet everything would have changed. Valentina misses Clara when she's gone, but also not really, because she finally has time to write the pig book, and she becomes totally absorbed in it. Clara calls her every day, often yelling at her and taking out her feelings about this divorce, always with a new narrative about how everyone is out to get her and stories of all these little slights that are major transgressions in her mind. In one of these calls, close to the end of her stay in Italy, she mentions the app Find My Friends and how they're going to set it up when she gets back so she can always see where Valentina is. And this wakes Valentina up, and she realizes that Clara will be home soon and everything will change. So she just sends her manuscript off as it is. Like, literally, the way it's written implies that she is basically sending it mid-sentence, and then the publishers are like, this is great, we want to publish it. After we do a bit of revisions and editing, we're going to publish this. And her and Kai and Ollie jump up and down and celebrate and, like, honestly freak out, but it was never communicated to me that the publishers might not accept her manuscript. Because that would be insane, right? Like, to pick a woman off the street, say, write a book even though you've never expressed a desire in that, and then once she writes it, you go, actually, this is dog shit, you spit in her face and walk away. What? Again, I don't know how any of this works. I'm just saying I don't think Matilde Pratesi does either. This feels like some sort of fantasy world for writers. Also, the publishers are like, it'll be just a couple weeks of editing and revision and then we'll print it. Excuse me? Also, the guy editing is Marcus. He's an editor now. There's an issue though. Clara is coming home and she's going to be tracking Valentina's whereabouts. I just want to say right now, because I think I'm going to forget to say it later, this never happens. She never does this. She never does the Find My Friends thing, though Valentina does a lot of planning around it. Valentina feels that there's no way that she can lie her way into being able to meet him at the publisher's office across the city because she's pretty sure she's going to be tracked when Clara gets home. She thinks about the problem for about 100 years, and then finally she thinks, I know just what to say. And she calls him and she says, hey, I can't come meet at the office. It's not that I don't want to, it's just that I can't. And he's like, okay, why? And she thinks, fuck, I really didn't want him to ask that. And then she re-explains to all of us all of the reasons why she can't go meet him, and she re-explains why she can't tell him that Clara won't let her, and then she finally says, I have a sick cat, and I can't be away from him for too long. Does that ever come up again? No. She honestly tells like quite a lot of sort of fantastical and easily disproven lies, and she literally never gets caught in any of them. Marcus ends up traveling to the bookstore multiple times a week to edit with her on her lunch breaks, surrounded by her coworker friends, and never is he like, how's your sick cat? This is totally dropped. It's especially annoying how frequently she lies and it never coming back to bite her in the ass, because she is not someone who can come up with something on the fly. So if she were to get caught in a lie, it would be a complete and utter disaster. But of course, nothing can really happen to our lovely narrator. There's no stakes, there's no tension. That is the rule of this book. For a long time, she works on editing and revising the book. She falls in love with Kai but doesn't acknowledge it, just says things like, I like how it feels when I look at them, or I like it when they talk to me, over and over and over. There is one thing that happens with Clara that I like, but then this as well is completely dropped, never to be mentioned again, where Clara has started changing the notes with the intention to humiliate and hurt Valentina, probably sensing that she's pulling away a little and creating a life outside of their friendship, but still within the confines of Clara's rules. She writes things like, wear your sweater inside out, or only wear one sock. This is great, and it never comes up again. There's no like build up to something worse, or the expectation of a new development where Clara mistreats Valentina in a different way, because this book is allergic to tension. Finally, the book she's writing is done, and boom, it's time for the launch party, all fucking ready. From conception to final product, this has been the quickest nonfiction book ever created. Kai and Ollie pester Valentina about inviting Clara to the launch party, and they won't back down. Obviously, having talked about this privately and come to the same conclusion that something is really wrong with Clara and Valentina's dynamic, Valentina's home life. Valentina gives an excuse about Clara going back to Italy because of some family issues, but Kai and Ollie share a knowing look. To be clear, this is 5 lines of dialogue over 8 pages because of how much Valentina pads it out with her descriptions of the dialogue and then interpretations of their meaning. She does get them off her back, and they tell her that Hermina, the old coworker, is coming to the party. That's the first time I've said that name out loud. That cannot be how you pronounce it, but I don't know another way, so I'm going with it. Hermina is the one that was mean to Clara at the Christmas party and bullied her about getting divorced or having an accent or whatever the fuck Clara said. Ollie tells Valentina point blank that Clara's version of events is not the real one and that she should talk to Clara about what really happened that night because she has not been told the whole story. Valentina is like, maybe it isn't true. I never knew Hermina to be unkind, but also Clara wouldn't lie to me. I don't know, we were meant to see this as a lie on Clara's part from the first mention of it, and it's one of many of Clara's stories that Valentina naively and unintentionally frames as being a lie while she says, but I believe it because it's Clara. She's Clara. She wouldn't lie to me. This reveal is not a shock to us, and it also doesn't feel that shocking to Valentina because she's kind of shown that she knew all along, even if she didn't, in order to frame Clara as a liar for our understanding, she has expressed an inkling of doubt, regardless of whether she immediately went back on it, right? So this surprise moment of maybe Clara's lying to you is so nothing. It's just another piece of this book that had potential and squandered it. On the night of the launch party, Valentina texts Clara to say that there's an event at the bookshop, so she'll be out late, but she'll come home after work to give her a bath and cook her dinner. And Clara just responds with, okay, make sure you come home. And even though we know, because we've experienced over 250 pages of Clara's behavior, Valentina goes, that's so weird that she's okay with it. Usually she would be mad at me. Well, I'm glad that was easy. Whew, I was so worried. She goes home to feed Clara, but mainly to grab an outfit to wear to the party. And of course, Clara has torn the place to shreds. There's like broken glass everywhere. All the dish towels are on the floor. And Clara has found out what is going on. And she screams and screams and screams at Valentina. But never for even a moment do you think that this altercation will end with Valentina unable to go to the party. Because as we've established, the author is too cowardly to really materially affect her narrator. So sure, it's a little tense. This is the biggest blow up we've ever seen from Clara, but in any other book with a similar plot, this would end with the devastation of Valentina missing an incredibly important night. The summation of all of her hard work and sacrifice, something that she could never get back. Like the minutes would tick down, and she would imagine each part of the night that she was missing, convincing herself that she could show up late, and then slowly having to let go of that hope, imagining everyone wondering where she was, what they thought of her absence, disappointing them. But no, she makes it. Clara does hit her in the face, hard enough to knock her off her feet. This is only consequential when it works for the narrative. She doesn't, show up with a black eye that she can't explain. She grabs a clean shirt and pushes past Clara, who doesn't follow her down the stairs, shocked as she is at being turned down and ignored. And then she gets to the party, perfectly on time, and none of her friends who have expressed concern at her home life notice the indent from Clara's ring embedded in her cheek. But you know who does notice it? Hermina, or however you would pronounce that name, I'm so sorry. Because we needed an excuse to get Hermina and Valentina alone in the bathroom so that they could talk about what happened at the Christmas party. Hermina tells her that Clara was shit-talking her, and Hermina stood up for her. That Clara was making fun of Valentina in front of all of these people that she had just met, while also trying to look like a saint for housing her and dealing with her because she's so weird and such a burden. And Hermina called her awful and cruel and stormed off. And at this, Valentina thinks, I can't imagine anyone ever speaking to Clara like that. The fact that Hermina did makes me in awe of her courage, which just kind of gives you a little sample of how awkward the writing has gotten as we get into the final pages of this book. There is a steep, noticeable decline in quality. Valentina has this journey over many pages of thinking where she realizes that she believes Hermina's version of events, and she knows in her heart Clara is a mean person who says mean things to her face, so of course would also do it behind her back. But then she has to get up on stage and read an excerpt from her book, so she has to push it all down, and she reads from the first chapter. She's written something like, humans and pigs share 98% of their DNA. So the next time that someone calls you a pig, they're more correct than you might think. And the crowd laughs, and she thinks, I don't know why they're laughing. That's a true fact. Okay, so now you're Sheldon Big Bang Theorying me. What the fuck? I'm tired. I'm sick of it. This is just like the epitome of an autistic caricature. This is ridiculous. If you were going to write her as struggling to understand the nuances of humor, you needed to do that from the start. You cannot just whip it out when you realize it's been a couple of sentences since you reminded your audience that Valentina is different. Fuck all the way off with that. This does not align with anything she's ever thought before or any of her past behavior. She's not a fucking robot. Get a grip. After she reads her excerpt and everyone loves it because she's the greatest nonfiction writer to ever do it, Kai finds her in the party and asks her if they could go on a date. And she's thrilled, and she thinks about it for probably 3 full pages. She has this whole revelation where she finally admits to herself that she likes Kai. And also she feels the need to quantify it in a weird way. It's a great night. It's the best night of her life. When she gets home, she knows that she's in for it with Clara, but she also feels ready to stand up for herself. She can see that Clara is awake, all the lights are on, and she sees a shadow moving in the window, but when she gets inside, Clara is passed out, unconscious and cold and gray on the floor, and this health scare undoes all of the progress Valentina had made mentally extracting herself from Clara's grasp. They go to the hospital where Clara is rushed away, and the doctors can't find what's wrong with her, and they say it was probably stress-related, as doctors tend to do when they don't know what's wrong. Me in the hospital with a resting heart rate of 175 BPM, and they're like, are you worried about anything? Before Clara is discharged, though, a nurse comes in and finds Valentina and says, if there's anything wrong at home, you can always come here and we'll help you. Which is weird as hell. And even Valentina is like, this is weird as hell. In all of the worry about Clara, which was exacerbated by the roller coaster of emotions that night, Valentina has realized that this is all her fault and she needs to commit herself to Clara. In her inner monologue here, the names that Clara calls her shows up, which would be great if it didn't go like, I'm pathetic. And then immediately, Clara's right when she calls me that. It won't allow me to do anything with any of what it gives me. Even that moment where she sees Clara in the window, that moment that is a very clear, heavy-handed planting of the seeds of doubt about Clara's medical incident, it brings it up over and over again and explains exactly what it means. Like, I caught on to that. I get it. So Valentina quits her job and she emails her publishers saying that she can't do any more press for the book and then spends all of her time nursing Clara back to health with her phone turned off. Clara decides that they need to move out of this house with all of its toxic energy and the memories of Edo, and instead they should live hours away by the sea, ripping Valentina away from any chance at reconnecting with her support system and from any pigs. They sell the house, they get everything in order, and 2 days from leaving, Clara has a checkup appointment at the hospital, and she of course asks Valentina not to come in with her, so Valentina goes to visit the pigs that she used to visit every weekend before Clara moved to town. She has a moment there where she feels like she's giving up everything that she loves, and she hugs the dude who keeps the pigs as if he's Kai and Ollie, who she has been actively ignoring despite their repeated attempts to check on her. And then she goes back to the hospital, and she sees that nurse again, and the nurse once again is like, I hope everything's okay at home, like super weirdly. It takes like many pages of Valentina deciding to turn back and talk to her, but she does. And she gets the nurse to tell her why she keeps saying all that shit. And the nurse is like, I probably shouldn't say this, but there was nothing wrong with your friend. She was faking it, and she reminds me of my sister's boyfriend who was abusive. Hello? First of all, malpractice suit now. Second of all, she didn't even see Valentina and Clara interact in the hospital. What in the world would make her overstep clinical boundaries to imply the friend of a patient that she might be experiencing abuse from the patient? That is a jump and a half. What an absolute stretch. I don't know why she didn't just say the same thing Hermina said, like she was saying awful things about you in the room when you were split apart. Would that have made sense? Like, not really, but at least it would have made a little more sense than whatever this is. The end of the book has Clara and Valentina leaving the hospital and doing some pre-moving shopping where Valentina confronts Clara about all of her lies in public and they get into a screaming match. Clara admits to all the lies, but the author kind of loses track of the narrative through all of Valentina's drawn out interjections, and their conversation ends with Clara getting into a cab and telling Valentina to get in as well, while Valentina says, I just want the truth. If you can't tell me the truth, I'm not coming with you. But Clara has already admitted to every single thing that Valentina has brought up. It feels like there's something specific Valentina is referencing here, but there's no loose ends left in this conversation, so it doesn't really make any sense to me. Clara leaves, and Valentina texts Kai and says, hey, can we still go on that date? And she texts Ollie and she says, do you still have a room open in your apartment and can I rent it out? And that is the book. I was anticipating the whole love will save her ending, and I knew it was going to be a little disappointing, but also like kind of the expected ending of this sort of story. What I didn't expect was for her relationships with her coworkers to be both ham-fisted in, like, oh my god, look, they're friends, Valentina has a good time when she's at work, and the people there support her and care for her, while also at the same time feeling extremely formal and impersonal, which gives a very cheap and inauthentic feel when it's meant to be heartfelt and hopeful at the end. I think you know by now that I found this book extremely disappointing. I think the main issue with it was that it feels incredibly self-conscious. For example, with Valentina and Clara's history. It gives you little tastes in the beginning that there was something big that happened between them, that there's something to reveal about their moving in together, and then it gives you the most milquetoast nothing burger story ever of all time. Like it could not be more boring, right? Valentina is in an exceptional situation with Clara. Lean into that. Who cares if it's unbelievable or ridiculous at face value? We're already there. You can sensationalize it. Make it interesting, even if that means it's unrealistic. Even if it means that the book is less relatable because fewer people have been through the narrator's exact experiences. Sure, I am certain that you spoke to the experiences of many readers who have gone through the loss of an important friend in their teenage years. That is a pretty universal experience that you have portrayed in a very general, broadly relatable way. But you have sacrificed an interesting story to do that. Good writers can get you to relate to and connect to very specific situations that are far outside of what you personally have experienced. The book has this extraordinary premise of this very abnormal relationship, and then it's so self-conscious, wanting you to believe that this relationship is something that could reasonably happen, that it spends the whole book trying to justify and over-explain its choices, and it's way too afraid to push anything else farther. So it flattens it all out just in case. It is writing to appeal to its most skeptical reader. But then, at the same time, there are so many parts that were totally and completely illogical to me. What do you mean that is how she wrote and published a book, a nonfiction book that she didn't research at all? What do you mean that's how the nurse talked to her? What do you mean a cafe will save this dying bookshop? And with the self-conscious writing, there's also Valentina's voice and inner monologue. I think I've complained enough about how that was handled, and I'm sure I've gotten through to you how I feel about that. I'm just really disappointed that a book that at the start had so much potential and subtlety and skill with how it was approaching writing this obviously autistic coded character got so worried that I wouldn't pick up what it was putting down that it just ended up becoming the caricature I was praising it for not being. There's a decline in quality here, kind of unlike anything I've ever read. The first chapter was so good and so compelling to me that it held me hostage, thinking that I liked the book way more than I actually did. I was just remembering how good it started, but honestly, like, it gets so bad so quickly. And by the end, it is something completely different. Even just on like the sentence level, word choice level, it's written in such a stilted and awkward way. This book is about, but also kind of not about, coercive control. Valentina is so uniquely vulnerable to it that it almost takes something away. It's that self-consciousness, the inability to have your character be complex and difficult to understand. So instead, you make her the most easily manipulated and controlled person to ever exist. And then at least we believe it. At its core, this should have been a very tense book. With this premise, it shouldn't have even been that difficult to create tension. The urgency to get home on time and do everything right and make sure you don't accidentally slip up somehow and change Clara's mood, it's all right there. But it is crushed under the weight of Valentina's inner narrative, taking up so much space in the book while doing absolutely nothing. It is painstakingly repetitive. There are also so many missing pieces. Like, for example, this is just a silly one off the top of my head, but I would have loved to see how their shared native language, living in a country with a different majority language, would have impacted their relationship and their connection. And I think that the book sets up the foundation to do that, and then it never does. Also, personal thing, I struggled to read something that was so British because they're always talking about tea. They're always making each other tea, and I kept getting distracted because I would get up to go make myself tea. All in all, I really wish that this book was better because I am still so deeply in love with the premise and the first 50 pages, but it just wasn't what it needed to be. Making a book with this premise, as boring as it is truly and genuinely a feat. I hope that pratesi finds her footing in her next book, and I look forward to trying again because while there is lots of room for improvement, I do think this had the bones of a good story, just not yet the skill to execute it. There are some really great components and ideas in here, and I appreciate them enough that I would definitely give her a second chance, and even a third chance. This is not the worst book ever. It's one of those very solid, like 2.5 to 3-star books that hurt way more than a pure 1-star because they could have been good. You can see a world in which they were a shining 5, and it hurts. I'm so upset about it. Okay, bye.